very efficient in our presentation. I also ask the presenters to try to be to the point, and also if you have comments or questions, make it quick. We try to keep some time for discussion also in the different presentation or set of presentation. So this is NMRG session, one session for this IETF week, and gentleman sitting next to me is Pedro Martinez Julia from NICT in Japan. He is one of the NMRG secretaries. He was appointed earlier this year, but since Jérôme, my new co-chair, is not here, we wanted also to highlight that we are not alone in managing this this research group. So thanks, Pedro, for being here. This is the notewell, so it is a reminder of the IETF policy. I mean, the RTF follows the IETF policy, and so this is a reminder of the IETF policies in effect on various topics, such as patents and code of conduct. So I invite you to have a deeper look into these different pointers and documents so that you're aware about the IETF policy on those topics. Thank you. As usual, and we need to go very quick, so thanks, Pedro will be a minute taker. I will also assist him, and if you want to help, it's on the Etherpad, but we still need a Miteco scribe. Anyone willing to just relay where we are in the presentation, and if there are any questions for our remote participants, it will be greatly appreciated. Yeah, Miteco scribe. Thanks, Will. So the blue sheets. Please fill the blue sheets, circulate the blue sheets if there are new participants coming in the room. It's very important in order to know who is participating and for the future meetings planning. Thank you. The agenda. So this is the introduction. I will go quickly through a bit of research group information. Then we will have the set of technical presentation. Essentially, this is centered on intent-based networking, the main activity of this research group. Currently, we have other activities, but for this session, it's essentially intent-based networking. So we will have Arthur, which will be remote, presenting on refining network intents for self-driving networks. And then we have a set of presentations which are more on the core intent-based aspects and architecture discussion. So an update on some draft intent classification by Will, IBM concept lifecycle and functionality by Alex, which will be remote. I hope so. Yeah, he's here. Good. And then a couple of presentations more dedicated to the architecture discussion that we are starting in the research group. I will do one of the presentation on behalf of Marinos, which is in Europe, so it's a bit late for him. And will also do a presentation on behalf of Sung Kyung. I don't think she. Okay, we will have to check, but I'm not sure. It was not in the planning that she will do it remotely. So, and a presentation on intent-driven management framework, which is there is also a draft on that. And then for this set of 4 presentations, to have a joint discussion, so to keep a bit of time for discussion for this aspect. And finally, we also wanted to report on some other activities that are still ongoing in the research group, summary of AI for network management activities. Pedro will make this summary and also include a presentation on status for the draft he has been submitting to the group on intelligent reasoning on external events for network management. Any questions so far on the agenda? Or if it's clear for everyone? Thank you. Quick recap on the meeting plans. So we are in IETF 105. We are our regular session right now, and tomorrow, for those interested, and I think you are aware of that, we have a one-day interim meeting, call it also workshop, which will be dedicated again to intent-based networking. It will be hosted in a very close university, engineering school, so it's called École de Technologie Supérieure de Montréal, and it will be hosted by our dear friends, Faten, the same location as we did last year, so we wanted to repeat the experience, and it was a very nice workshop. In October, we will be having an in-person interim in Roma, in Italy. It will be co-located with the Network of the Future IEEE conference. You can have a link to some information about this conference in the slides. The topic of this interim meeting will be to go a bit more into the practical activity of the research group for intent-based networking, so to focus on proof of concepts and tool for intent-based systems. We would like to have a gathering with people working or implementing on some of the technical aspect of intent-based from a tool and I would say implementation perspective, and bring together and see what can work between those two. We will send more details on this interim meeting. We are preparing a call for demo, and it will be, as soon as it will be out, we will provide more information. And you are all welcome to come to Roma in October, first week of October. We plan to be in IETF 106 in Singapore, and also based on I would say the output of the preparation in October for the interim, to include also participation in the hackathon. Again, we will provide more information as soon as we know a bit more how we would like to participate in the hackathon. We will continue to run our monthly virtual meeting, which happens to be quite successful and quite useful. The next one is planned for mid-end of December. We just put a doodle for checking the best slots, and I think there will be an email on the mailing list very soon to ask you to put your availability there. With Jerome, we are working also on the charter update, essentially to highlight the main item of the research agenda that Energy is currently investigating. So proposing an umbrella text covering the different topics, but also providing a more specific description on the intent-based topic, including work plan refinement and milestones. The other topics are also described there, even if they are a bit less, I would say, detailed. There is a draft version available at the link. It's very draft at the moment, and we are still working on that with Jerome. The idea is to stabilize that after the summer. Your comments and feedback are most welcome on this new chapter. So we have our session now. The interim will be tomorrow. If you look at the link in the slides and also on the mailing list, you have all the details for the location, the program, all the nice things that we are planning for this tomorrow workshop. And that's all. Any question before we switch to the technical presentation? If not, then I will invite Arthur to get ready, and we put the slides.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Can you also see me? I'm not sure. Yes. So, can I start? Excuse me.
Arthur, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm here today, guys, to present our work on refining network intent for self-driving networks. This work was actually published in a SIGCOMM workshop last year. So let me start by introducing you guys on what a self-driving network actually is. Well, basically, a self-driving network would ideally run itself. But to do that, it would first need some guidance on how to operate and how to behave. Can you go over to the next slide, please? So here we have a very high-level architecture of what a network, self-driving network could be. And of course, here, that guidance on how to behave is what we call here in this picture an intent that, of course, has to be processed and turned into network configuration and then deployed into the network. From there, a network, self-driving network would monitor itself, learn from the monitor data, and adapt this process over time. If you go over to the next slide, please, you can see that the focus of our work in this is the first part right here, that is marked in red, which consists in basically translating the high-level intent on how the network should behave into network configuration. So you can go over to the next slide, please. If you now, if you wanted to do that nowadays, you would have to rely on maybe command line interfaces for instances or configuration using files, maybe. And if you go over to the next slide, please.
Arthur, can you still hear us? Can you talk, please? Arthur, are you still here? Okay, maybe he's back. Arthur, they're opening the stream. Yes. Will, can you put a call for help in the Mitecode scribe? I think they will react to that. Yeah. If it's still working. Arthur, can you hear us? Arthur, can you speak, please? We have the video feed, but we cannot hear you.
Hello.
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So as I was saying, if we wanted, if you were using traditional networks and you wanted to deploy an intent, you would have to break it down into multiple command line interface commands. But if you went a higher level up, and you can pass the next slide, you maybe used programmable networks, you would have OpenFlow interfaces, or P4, which is very useful, but still very hard to manage, very hard to master, and very prone to mistakes. That is why many have proposed, and you can go over the next slide, many have proposed several network programming languages, configuration abstractions such as PGA, Janus, Netcat, and many others, which help a lot in configuring networks and deploying intents, but still require network operators to learn complicated and master network programming languages that are not very easy to do. So we asked ourselves in this work, could we go ahead and it would go a step further and use natural language to deploy an intent? You can go over to the next slide, please. Actually, you can go 2 slides. So we proposed a network intent refinement process using NILE as an abstraction layer. NILE is basically a network intent definition language we propose, which very closely resembles the English language. We designed it to be very easy to read. And we do that because we use NILE as an abstraction to ask for confirmation on the information we extract from natural language. So there's 2 main points. You can go over 2 slides. 2 main points in this network intent refinement process. That is, we extract the intent directly from natural language, and you only use NILE as an abstraction to request confirmation. You can go over to the next slide, please. To explain our process, let me describe this experimental scenario we developed using our prototype and Sonata NFV, which is a framework for deploying virtual network functions over Mininet. And so in this scenario, we set up 2 clients, an iPerf client sending UDP traffic, and a general HTTP web client sending traffic to servers over 2 Open vSwitches. And so you can go over to the next slide. In this scenario, if a network operator wanted to maybe deploy 2 virtual network functions, let's say a firewall and an intrusion detection system. Can you pass the slide? Okay, and you can pass one another once again. And so using our proposed intent refinement process, an operator would only have to reach a client that could be either a cell phone or a computer, any device with a chatbot interface such as Google Assistant, which we use to develop our prototype. And so attached to Google Assistant, we developed an entities extractor using Dialogflow, which is a Google proprietary tool. You can pass 2 slides. What the entities extractor do in this scenario is process the text given by the operator and label each word as a given entity we defined. For instance, we look for in the text possible endpoints, possible middle boxes, possible QoS requirements, anything that an operator might want to do to manage its networks. And so if you go over, which in this case right here is FIRO and IDS, and of course the origin and the destination of the intent. Those extracted entities are then sent over to a intent translator. You can pass 1 slide, which is in fact a sequence-to-sequence learning model that translates the entities extracted into a fully fledged Nile intent. You can pass over to the next slide. And so here you can see the Nile intent generated from that extracted text. And you can see that it's very easy to read. Even if you don't know the syntax, you can understand what it's doing. And we present that to the operator for him or her to confirm that. You can pass over to the next slides. And so if the operator confirms it, you can pass over the next slide. You can just go passing over the slides right now. We get the feedback from the operator and add it into our training database for the sequence learning model. And with that deployed, if that confirmed intent, we then pass it over to an intent deployer, which compiles it into NFV commands and finally deploys it into the network. You can pass over to the next slides. That is the general concept of our idea of our refinement process. For this, I cannot see. Okay, and you can see there the generated Sorata NFV commands. And so those commands are then deployed into the network, generating our final result, which is in the next slide. That is that all the traffic coming from the iPerf client now goes over through to middle boxes that the operator requested. You can just skip over to the conclusion. Now we did some very preliminary evaluation on this work, but you can skip that. It's not very important, I guess. Over to the conclusions and summary. In this evaluation, we just show that our work has enough accuracy to be used in a controlled scenario. And so to summarize, the question we posed was how to deploy network intent using natural language. And so we proposed a refinement process using Nile that requires very low technical knowledge. And we use feedback from operators to learn over time. And so as future steps, there's still ongoing research, so we plan to develop Nile compilation process over to OpenFlow and P4 backends and further evaluate this proposal. In terms of NMRG, maybe, I'm not very familiar with the process of NMRG, but I can see that there are at least 3 open drafts, and I'm sure our proposal could contribute to some points in those drafts, maybe. But that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for doing the remote presentation. We have 5 minutes for questions on the presentation from Arthur.
Hello, this is Diego Lopez. When you mentioned that you're using Sonata, are you using the Sonata, how do you call it, the Vim emulator? Or, because I saw this Mininet and my impression was that they were using this. I mean, their Vim emulator or using the full framework?
No, we're using a VIM emulator, yeah, that's available in Sonata. We used a distribution that they made available in GitHub from the VIM that uses VIM emulator.
Okay, and well, I'm curious because I think there is would be interesting when you mentioned these OpenFlow and P4 backends. Are you considering other potential backends? I mean,
Yes.
Do you have an architecture for the backends?
We considered that to fully realize this proposal, we would have to support traditional networks. So we were evaluating using OpenConfig as a possible backend in turns.
Other questions? If not, thanks again, Arthur.
Thank you.
Of course, stay online for the rest of the meeting, and
Sure.
there will be follow-ups on the mailing list. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Will Liu from Huawei. So basically, we have a very brief, short slot to present the update of this draft. So basically, we updated it to 0.1 version. And next, please. So first of all, as some of you might not be here in last meeting, so the goal of this draft is to achieve agree intent related terminology and classification, because as you might know that in all, there is a lot of SDOs are doing similar work in intent. However, the intent term itself is kind of vague and people are speaking with the same term but with different meanings. So here we propose several ways that to classify this intent into, for example, this whether it's a user solution or when to activate, and be based on the life cycle requirement or granularity, something like that. And the scope, in this draft, the scope is related to the, not only the existing network but also some network in the near future. So basically, they are, for example, we have SDN controllers and also the network management systems, and some autonomic system and nodes. Next, please. So this is the history. We proposed the very beginning the draft with actually there is a small fault in the name, the 0.0 version at last October, and in this April before the IETF meeting, we updated it to another 0.0 version. Sorry for that. And before this meeting, we updated to 0.1. And so the main updates are listed here. So we got some feedback, comments from the mailing list. We addressed some of them. For example, Brian's comments about some sentences. And also we added more detailed materials. For example, we added a table I will talk about later, and some more contributions were collected into this document. Also, we did some small modifications. But there are still, I need to say that there are still some of the comments that are not addressed by this update, because we start a new draft because we think that too many complicated, contents are in the same document may lead to some misunderstanding. So we start a new draft called architecture, so which will address the bottom two comments from Brian and Diego. Next, please. So this is the table of content. So basically, the main updates, if you check the differences, the main updates are in the three main sections listed in the red. Next, please. And one update is that we add a table of the intent users, because if you look at the ways of classification, the first of all is the classification based on the user, meaning that who are using the intent, who will give the system a intent for it to translate and to validate or to fulfill. So we have three main areas: carrier, DC, and enterprises. And in each area, we have several kinds of user. For example, in carrier network, we have the network operator and the service designer, service operators, and customers, subscribers. So that's it. That's the, this basically show you that in this category, in this way of classify the intent, how do we do that? And we also have several tables and lists to tell you how do we classify the intent. Next, please. So the second update is kind of challenging, and we wanted to actually, we put it here to trigger more discussions. Also during the week, I already talked with chairman and also other authors of other documents about this part. So basically, we want to have a roadmap for the, not only about the intent, but also the network management, so that you will see that, for example, in which period intent is started, and what will be the future for them, the intent as well as the network management. So based on our, because there is some publications recently about this network autonomous. For example, there is a link here. It's about a white paper from TMF, which is recently published in this early this year about the 5 level. Actually, it's 0 to 5. There are 6 levels of the network self-driving, just like what I mentioned in previous presentation. So in this white paper, actually, there are several levels defined, meaning that if we look at the evolution of network management, so what's the past, what's it currently, and what will be the future. So in each levels, the way we control network is different. For example, now we can have our centralized way, to issue the service, to deploy the service. And if we have this intent work realized, so in future we can have this intent-based way of control and manage this, the system. So we put, for example, in level 2 and level 3, some of the intent functionality can be realized here. So next, please. Due to the time limit, I cannot explain the details, but those are all written in our draft. And the third part is actually, this is a contribution from Pedro. So basically, we add one small section to discuss about the relationship with AI and intent. So if we considering the system will contain AI in the intent-based system, so we will add an additional dimension of how do we classify the intents. So basically here, what Pedro proposed is that the degree of formality is an important dimension to classify the intent. So this is another way of classification. So next, please. Okay, this is our last slide. I hope I didn't waste too much time. So the conclusion is that if you read the draft, you can see that we already proposed 5 or 6 ways to classify the intent. So the current version, I think we already have the means of, the intent means to different stakeholders, as well as the taxonomy of the classification. And we believe that this might be a foundation of future discussion, not only in our, MRG or RTF, IETF, but also for the other SDOs that they may refer to our, ways, so that we will know, for example, 3GPP is working and SE is working, TMF, MEF, well, which kind of intent, what class of intent they are talking about. So our next step will be we want to refine this document by providing some specification for the proposed classification, so a more formal definition, and also some prioritization and discuss between the overlap. And also, we, as suggested by Laurent, we will probably add a section to describing the state of art of intent. For example, what other SDOs are working and which class are they working on, and also some of the comments from mailing list and offline. So we are here. We want to ask for volunteers to help to review this document. This is not a very long one. It's only about less than 20 pages, and also to contribute. And also, I will ask for, if the group think it's ready, we will ask for adoption, but this is not just for the group decision. So that's it. That's all my presentation.
Thank you. We have time for quick questions.
Yeah.
I have some comments to share. I think it's an important work, and I really invite the research group to provide reviews on the mailing list in order to improve the quality of this work, and because I think it's important that we, I would say, we bring clarity in that space, because as Will was mentioning, there are other activities outside. There have been many definitions, many approaches to intent-based networks. And so I think one of the mission of Energy in that space, and would be a good outcome, will be to provide clarity, especially this categorization. If we manage to do it well, it can be a good tool for others, industry, in the research, and other standards bodies to reuse our proposed classification. So I think this is a good starting point. I encourage this work to continue, and also with other participation from the other of the research group. Thank you. Hi, Alex, you're next. Can you talk, please, to see if we can hear you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay. Yeah, you can go.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, good. Yeah, so I'm going to provide the next update on the draft CAM NMRG distributed this intent, also on behalf of my co-authors. Next, please. One previous, sorry. You skipped one slide? Okay, yeah, so basically as a status update, basically since the last ITF, we have updated this draft to revision 02. This followed the discussions that we had at the NMRG interim meeting in San Jose that took place 1.5 months ago. Couple of updates that have been done since then. One thing, basically, the title underwent a slight change. There have been numerous edits throughout, including basically a clear delineation between intent and other concepts, specifically policy. That is something which I think we generally have been struggling with a little bit. And we added a few new sections. One thing basically on first order principles of intent-based networking, a new section on intent life cycle that goes into basically how is intent being managed, how does intent come into being, how is it modified, and what happens later, and so forth. And then finally, also we have a new section on intent research challenges, since after all we are a research group. Next, please. So the new document structure, or the updated document structure, is what is depicted here. So basically, you see, we have, it starts with the introduction of the concepts. What is intent-based intent and intent-based management and networking? How does it relate to other concepts? This is followed by the principles behind intent-based networking, the lifecycle consideration, and then the functionality. that is associated with intent, which includes not just intent fulfillment, but also intent assurance as well. And this whole thing is then essentially concluded by the research challenges. Next, please. So we have only very limited time, so I will just basically skip over these very quickly. Regarding the intent concept clarifications, essentially one of the things that we discussed also the offside is really fundamentally what we need to bring across, that intent is fundamentally outcome oriented. So basically it is about what outcomes does a network provider expect, not how those outcomes are achieved, which is basically supposed to be provided by the intent-based system. And accordingly, the intent system, not the user, is responsible for determining how these desired outcomes can actually be achieved, and how they should be translated into actions, policies, algorithms, and so forth. And so from that definition is just very briefly regarding the relationship to policy. One item that was discussed was that we believe that really actually intent-based relates to policy-based in similar ways how AI and machine learning relates to expert systems and inference engines and so forth. Again, basically meaning that intent is defined by the outcomes, not so much how to achieve them, versus policies do define rules, for instance, events, conditions, actions, which say what to do under what circumstance. So, yeah. Next, please. So regarding the first order set of principles, we did define, there's a new section in the document on this with the starter set of principles defined, which are certainly subject to further discussion. So here, just very briefly mentioning them. So the first principle is that there's a single source and single version of truth regarding intent. This is important to capture drift in the system and ensure the system converges and adheres to what was actually intended, as opposed to basically change over time. Second principle concerns one touch, but not one shot. This basically indicates that it may actually take iterations and interactions to arrive at the desired intent. It's not intent may not necessarily be specified or declared once, like a CLI or so would be, but basically there will be ambiguities that will have to be resolved, unintended consequences that have to be avoided, and so forth. Third principle concerns autonomy and oversight. This basically has to do with that while an intent-based system will conduct tasks on its own, users need to be given the necessary tools so that to retain an understanding of the current state and why things are happening that are happening. Fourth principle concerns learning, so which basically all means it's intrinsically tied to AI. This basically means that the system should be able to assess the effectiveness of its own action and be able to improve in order to optimize those outcomes and adapt to dynamic conditions and changing contexts on its own without having to be told what to do. And then finally, we have explainability, that the system should be able to explain its actions and reason about the effectiveness. Again, this is similar to some related challenges in machine learning. And then finally, abstractions, that basically users do not need to be concerned with how intent will be mapped to lower level artifacts. Next, please. Okay, so intent lifecycle, and this is also very much ongoing set of discussions, as is indicated by the fact that we have not just one, but actually two figures regarding this. Without going into the details here, the main thing is basically that the intent lifecycle here is basically distinguishes between three different phases. One thing basically where the intent is defined or articulated by users. From the second phase, where that is basically translated and rendered into some way that is consumable and so forth by controllers, operating support systems, and so forth. And then finally, basically, this is followed by the operation phase. Next slide, please. So second viewpoint or second perspective, slightly different. In terms of basically this one depicts basically the difference between the user space, the network operation space, and then the intent-based system space in the middle. indicating that the intent lifecycle will involve both fulfillment of operations, so basically where you go from recognizing and articulating the intent again to translating it and rendering it into the network, to the network operation space where things actually ultimately get configured, provisioned, and orchestrated, to then the reverse phase where you basically monitor, observe, analyze, aggregate, and finally basically enable the users to report and oversee. Next one. So, and finally, just a small set of intent research challenges. And this is surely will be an open-ended set, but basically the starter set, basically there are 3 things that the document identifies. First aspect concerns intent interfaces, because really ultimately the goal is that the system is able to infer the intent of the user, as opposed to the user having to basically define some special language and so forth that the system would understand. So in that sense, intent is different from a Yang data model, it's different from a CLI or an RPC, for instance. And so this involves human-machine interactions. How do you have basically new styles of interfaces, for instance, that allow also to clarify, to iterate, to allow selection between different alternatives of actions and so forth. Second set of research challenges concerns the explanation component. So one question is, of course, if all you do is define the outcomes that you want, and it's up to the system to act, the question is really, how do you retain control or an understanding of what the system is actually doing, and if it is actually and basically explaining where these things come from. And of course, the ability to explain those actions is important for a lot of activities, from troubleshooting the system to improving the confidence of users, and ultimately also allow users to still retain a measure of control. And then finally, basically, IBN metrics concerns the assessing the effectiveness of the outcomes of the intent-based systems, adapt, progress, and so forth. Next one. And yeah, I think that was the last step. So sorry, this was a very quick run through, but these are basically the additions which are in the document. And we expect a lot more discussion, and ultimately we hope that we can at some point request adoption of this as a working group item. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. We have time for quick questions.
So actually, I already sent a couple comments to the mailing list about several sections. As I said, I also have some comments to those 2 life cycle figures. So first of all, as we mentioned that we have 5 or 6 principles. However, in the first figure, some of the principles didn't show there. For example, we don't have learn function. And also the validation part is kind of, I'm not sure this validation is, what kind of, what are we validating here? And my second comments will be that, I think the 2 figures are not aligned with each other. So I would suggest that in our next version, we may, because we are actually we are just only want to show this life cycle figure. So I think we can merge them into one, just to be more consistent.
Okay.
And I have some of the other comments, and I will send it to the mailing list.
Sure. Yeah. So quick response. First of all, yeah, I'll respond to the mailing list separately. Of this, did not have the chance to do so beforehand. Regarding the other items, there were a couple of items. One thing, basically, regarding alignment of the figures and regarding some things that require adjustments. Absolutely, this is very much basically still a little bit in raw format. Further discussions about are needed. We do intend to either align these figures or basically make it clear that there are really different viewpoints and showing basically different aspects. Regarding the validation, one aspect of the validation concerns validating that the network, or maybe that the actions in the network is taken, that they do actually still adhere and conform to what was intended. So basically, this is related to this assurance aspect of this. So perhaps perhaps we need to work that one out. But this is just a very quick response to this point. Other items that sorry, we had several questions. I don't know if I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think you didn't miss anything, but just the validation function block in these two figures, the location are different. I mean, the position. So that might be confusing.
That's true.
Alex, clarification. Again, this is work in progress. There are two figures. It really reflects the fact that among the authors have been different views that are not yet stabilized.
Yes,
Just the validate in this diagram is to validate, I will say, the correctness of the intent expression. The validate that you have in the second life cycle is more, as Alex was mentioning, to kind of validate or verify maybe more how well the intent was actuated on the network and if there is some drift. So to measure this, the difference between the intended configuration and the actual configuration.
Yeah, that's why I said if we use the same term in two figures, that
we will see also that in the presentation from Guillaume, there will be also this validation aspect that comes. So I think it's means that it's an important aspect, but we are still not at the end of the story.
Using IETF terminology, we are comparing operational derived states against intended state, and if there's delta, system should figure out how to get to the intended state. This is what it really means.
Hi, Alex. This is Benoit Claes. So I read the draft this afternoon. It's a good start, right? But it seems that there is a focus on configuration, right? What you just mentioned was the derived state. So this is what you call in NetMod, like, okay, I want to configure something. I've got an intended state, and I see the apply state, which is pure configuration. I think like the key that we need to focus on also is the assure part, and the assure part is about operational data. And this is like the big issue in intent, right? How do we make sure that it's not about making sure your stuff is configured, right? Sure, it's configured fine, but it's also about trying to find the operational data to make sure that it works, that it's up and running. It's like in the example with the first example with the firewall, right? Great, your firewall is configured. Is this your intent? Well, no, you want your firewall to be up and running. So this is maybe one part where when I read the draft, we need a little bit focus there. And maybe this is such a difficult part in the intent base that it should be in the what you call the research challenges. And then I was not too sure if this was the one you mentioned by IBM metrics there, because there are only 3 lines there of and this is, you know, just assessing the effectiveness of the configuration. Yeah, great, sure. We want to assure that it's running as we want, which is a big difference that it's up and running. It's just configured.
Jeff, so I would like to disagree with the derived state. It's not the configuration state. It's the result of configuration. So if I have LLDP or BGP or any other way to derive state, this is the state that's going to be compared to intended, not what I've configured. It's real validation of operational state plus things that I've learned that haven't been configured explicitly.
So a quick, quick response. So I completely agree regarding the importance of assurance. This is something that is often missing. We will need to make this clearer. And actually, regarding the assurance, I think there are more aspects than even just making sure that the system is running. It is also basically the effect to assess how effective is the translation of the desired outcomes into the system. So there are several dimensions of this. But anyway, we'll need to expand on those aspects.
Okay, next comments and questions, please.
Hello, Sabine here. I'd have a question about maybe slide 2, where you characterize your intent. Maybe not. So about the outcome, the fact that it's outcome oriented. So you say the presentation says, what outcomes does a network provider expect? And well, I would have expected that that it would be what outcome does the user of the intent expect, because intents are not intended only for operations. I would rather see it for, because it's so abstracted, for like third parties or.
Sure. So I guess it's a question about who the actors are. Right? When you say the intent user, there are different roles. I completely do agree that there are different parties to that, and I think some of this will also relate to the terminology or taxonomy in terms of that there is, well, one aspect is certainly the network network provider, but there are going to be there are going to be other parties as well. So take this as a network provider, okay, as a slash user, and later on, of course, these things will have to be related at outcomes at different levels, right? There will be different. There are going to be high-level outcomes, and there are going to be more specific outcomes on specific service instances, for instance.
Can I have a second question? Regarding the validation or the user feedback. So right now, it seems to be focused on, did I understand you correctly? Well, I see that you also have the reporting and the other phase. Do you intend to specify different levels of validation? For example, first step would be, well, did I compile your, did I understand you correctly, validate, and then maybe the system would have other feedback such as, is it feasible regarding network capabilities, for example?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. There is a section in the document that talks to functions or functionality that will need to provide from an intent-based system, and this is basically where we would, this is basically where those, where those things will be accounted for. This would be, where is it, in section 7, I guess, which I didn't go into here in this presentation, because that is the part that hasn't changed much versus the previous version.
Okay, thank you.
Sabine, I will encourage.
What? I guess something. Okay.
Yeah, that was about to say. Sabine, I think your comments are valid and good. Can you bring them to the mailing list, or at least in the review of the draft? It will be very much useful to progress this work and see what are the required actions. Thank you.
Dan Bogdanovic. My main concern is about the assurance. So how we will do the assurance? Well, we have what is configurational data, what is provisional data, what's provisioning data, and then how we will do the translation and assurance that the configuration has been translated into the right operational model. Because even within the same vendors, we have different models where they have multiple different configuration operational models that do not match. And how you will solve that? I saw in the next two drafts that will be presented, there are some tries at that, but that is becoming, a significant problem. How to make sure that that you can really verify, oh, this was my configurational data that changed in the provisional data because I'm getting some dynamic inputs from other systems, and then what I'm getting from the rest of the network. How can you verify that the intent has been really translated correctly?
Okay, yeah, thank you for this comment. I think part of this actually I agree this is needed, and I do think this is actually where some of the research challenges lie, right? Because this relates to explaining that, explaining, for instance, what you did, why the actions and so forth are supposed to meet the desired outcomes and so forth.
Alex, Benoit here. So the question I'm asking is, can research solve that one? Because whenever you said, oh, hey, we're going to apply AI for it, well, I'm thinking, well, no, it's not going to work, right? You need like the domain knowledge expertise to be able to assure that if you're covering blah, this one will be assured by itself and within the full context.
Yeah. So I think the first point to see if it can be solved is to articulate it clearly as a research problem, and then see, and then challenge the research community to come up with solutions for this. But I guess one part, so perhaps for us, there's the challenge is, well, not simply to solve it, but maybe as a first step to merely articulate what the problem is and get people working on that.
Let's look through this next presentation and this draft, and then we can put this correlation between them, because this one will put some of the issues up
we
front.
had a discussion time at the end of this kind of set of presentation. We're already a bit beyond the schedule, so let's switch to the next one. So I'm the next one to talk, but in fact the slides were prepared by Marinos. He's in Europe, so it was a bit difficult for him to be up and present. So I tried to do the presentation on his behalf. I've been working with him on some of those considerations, essentially the first slide, and then more the functionality are from Marinos. Here what I'm going to highlight is more some consideration I would like us at the research group when we develop our work on the architecture for intent-based systems, I would say to start the right way and to scope it well, in the sense that we are already having some proposal for architecture on intent-based systems, but we don't have a clear problem statement first. Challenges, we start to see challenges in some of the draft, and I will say a limited set of requirements will be good as starting point. So let's try also in our next steps in the research group for this type of activity to address at least those points quickly and well, and then we can jump into the architecture discussion. Also, I will recommend the research group to focus on intent-driven, intent-based, or whatever intent-defined aspect, specific aspect of the work we are doing, and not to try to consider kind of general management framework or automation framework and say, okay, we will have configuring the devices and different levels in that architecture. So really try to extract out of this design activity what is specific to do it in intent-based style, intent-based approach, and not to try to go into the other, I will say, layers of the system. In terms of design principles and methodology, I'm still discussing this a bit with Marinos, and I hope tomorrow we'll touch on that a bit, is to put some principles in, design principles in how we want to do our architecture work, and aim for simplicity, so not try to over-engineering things. Very important, I think, to provide flexibility in how the architecture will be provided, so that it can be easily reused or integrated with other implementation of frameworks beyond NMRG and beyond, strictly speaking, intent-based systems. Extensibility, in the sense of having a modular design so that we can plug in, plug out different functionality. Also, over time, if we think there are new approaches or new functionality that could be useful in that intent-based framework, so that we don't have to redesign all the connectivity between the blocks to just add some sub-functionality or other I would say other components. And integrability or integration is the fact that I really believe an intent-based system, if we design it as a kind of standalone architecture, completely out of connection with other systems that we are also developing in IETF, but also in other groups or in the research and industry products, it will fail. We have seen that for other initiatives. I think we should really, that's why I say we need to focus on the intent specifics and to think at the design time, how we will plug this into, I don't know, with NFV, with SDN, with 5G types of architecture, and of course, other types of network, but we should not put it completely standalone, completely isolated. We should think at it will be integrated. I mean, even I can take only one block, one module of this framework, and I can plug it into something else, and it will help to bring the systems towards more intent-based systems. Final point, consider service-based architecture approach and principles. This is to highlight a bit the previous point on simplicity, extensibility, etc. Is that service-based architecture could be a nice approach to consider. I'm not putting any prerequisite on that, but we have seen recently more specification coming from the standardization organization that use service-based architecture. It's just an open point. Do we want to go this way or not? Not so critical at that stage. Other consideration for the design of intent-based network, intent-based systems, stating first the objective, simplify the configuration of complex infrastructures. So a couple of I would say, consideration. Intent should be agnostic of implementation details. So the importance of the right abstractions at the design time. What should be the lower boundary of an IBN architecture? What it should configure? We can see in the next slide proposal for that, and I think this relates to what I say: be intent specific, not try to make a full management architecture. How IBN coexists with legacy management system and emerging management technologies. Automatic decomposition of intent and continuous informants of intent. These are more related to critical functionality we aim for this system. So determining the lower IBN boundary, again, this is a proposal still being discussed between Marinos and I, and of course we want to expose it to the research group for your consideration. The first option, so to go up to configuring, I would say, the network device, network element. No. If you have.
Yes, I do. Dan Bogdanovic. My main issue here is with the management system. You have to define it. Most of the management systems today in place are element management systems. They're not providing you what you need on the underlying, from the underlying management system. They will provide you implementation level APIs, which will be very hard for you to translate your IBN APIs into the device. You will end up as the option one and all the issues here. So for really to be determining the lower IBN boundary, we should define what kind of management system we would expect the IBN to talk to. Most of when people say management system, have an EMS in place, I want to talk to the EMS. And then I will mention again, all the implementation details are being exposed. And then how will you do it on each different vendor and each different software release and each different version?
I agree with your point on the current situation, and I think it's also, I'm not in the head of Marinos, but I think he has specific assumptions for option 1 and option 2, which you can see a bit here. If you look at the bottom part where you have this output of the decomposition logic, configuring management function, when he is aiming at management system management function, he's not thinking about an EMS type of thing, but more abstractions of different capabilities in the network, and then you can wrap them as management functions. And this is why you wanted that this is the target of the, I would say, the lower level that an intent-based system should output to.
So some of his assumptions, because they're not in the document, it would be good for his assumptions to be at least described.
There is no document, and it's just a slide for this one. The draft is on the other presentation, but this one has no draft yet. I mean, all your points are valid. I agree, and we need to make explicit our assumptions, and this is clearly open discussion. But if you are referring to a draft on architecture discussion, this is not the right presentation. This is the next presentation from Kyung, which has a draft and some diagrams. Okay,
I mixed them up.
This is two different threads, and we try to start this discussion. But your points are valid. So option 1, again, to configure directly the device or to configure management functions. With some implications on what the architecture should include or not include, and also properties, I will say good or less good properties of the resulting solution. For the sake of time, I will not go into too much detail here. This is a general diagram to highlight the main functions Marinos and I are thinking about in the as functionality for the architecture, and how they relate a bit to each other. The important aspect is more on the next slides, two slides, sorry. What are the different functionality providing? So the offering tool, high-level technical requirement that drives the management function. So this is to capture, I would say, the core part of the intent. Based to also the previous comments for the previous presentation, considering different types of intents. If it's an end user or customer, he will express service types of intents, what I want the provider to give me for my business logic, and operator type or infrastructure type of intent, which is more, I'm a network operator. I have to satisfy user intent. I can also express operational intent to say, this is how I want my network to react to those intents without going into all the technical details of provisioning and trade-off on cost, robustness, availability, etc. The decomposition logic block, so to resolve the intent to the relevant service, to resolve intent to relevant service and select the appropriate management function. So this is at this level to highlight what will be the choice of the we'll say network management function, computation, or storage management function. And also including the method and techniques that will be realizing this decomposition logic, but I think we should not, in the research group specification or work, prescribe what those specific methods should be. To leave it open, we can make examples and validation to prove that it's working, but not to prescribe a specific choices of method and techniques or implementation, but maybe what's working well and less well, or is well suited, not well suited. So, and to allow to go from very simple techniques like mapping up to more elaborated reasoning capabilities. Decomposition is facilitated by an abstract infrastructure model, resources and commodities, what you can see also on the previous slides, to expose an exposure framework on the infrastructure. Service and management function descriptors to represent the capabilities of your management functions. And optionally, a knowledge base to store prior knowledge and best practices on how intents can be have been actuated and the performance of this actuation. Going on with the other elements of the proposed architecture or for consideration, intent repository to store and retrieve intents, high level and low intent representation. Again, if we, in the draft or the presentation from Alex, we have this single source of truth. We need to have artifacts to support this this principle and to be enabled to make interesting operation to if we estimate that there is a drift between the intended and the actual configuration or the actual state of the network. This is typically a tool that we can use to Okay. Consistency analysis to detect and resolve the inconsistency at the expression of the intent and traduction to the configuration, specification errors, competing goals, how to resolve those sometimes contradicting questions or asked to the network, and to carry out, this is carried out during the decomposition phase. Interface to the management system, so selected management function and execution parameter. This is typically kind of so-called softbound interfaces or APIs to call the right controllers, the right EMS management system interfaces. Orchestrator coordinator as contact point in the infrastructure management system. Also the feedback here to report on the actual state of the network and then to allow this comparison analysis of the drift. And then that's the end of the presentation.
Just answer. So it's a comment, and again, from personal experience, the intent consumption interface seems to be the most complicated one. Actually, not something that's southbound of intent system.
You mean the intent composition?
Consumption, so the interface between business logic and intent-based system. As of today, I think everyone who is trying to build something is building kind of number of workflows trying to do this. There's zero standardization, and trying to connect intent-based system to business logic is an extremely complicated exercise. Pretty much, you cannot do anything unless you try to just hack things together. So I think it would be really good to address, or at least try to think how it could look like and how business logic OSS BSS layer could interact with the intent-based system.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't want to put every discussion for tomorrow, but what I exposed to the mailing list as something I would like us to discuss tomorrow is using examples of so-called intent expressions and highlight what are the typical structural part of this intent. So capturing the functional part, for instance, what is the business expressed in the intent, and all, I mean, what supporting languages or logic we need to, ontologies we need to support. Not making any choice on languages, but what will be key properties that will enable us to manipulate those functional parts and derive it to more the capabilities of the system.
Brian Carpenter, your first open question was whether you would, the IBM would interface to the devices or to the management system. I think it's probably more complicated than that, because I think there's certainly a third option, which is interfacing to distinct service agents. For example, a service agent that's managing, well, address prefixes. You know, so you're not talking to the device, you're talking to a function which is somehow might be part of the management system, but it's not the management system.
I agree with you. This is starting point, and again, I don't want to discharge myself, but this is more a proposal from Marinos. We are still working on that. I'm also working on other, for instance, in ETSI ZSM, there is a framework that is proposed that has a bit more intermediate layers in this kind of so-called management system. I think IBM could be a good addition to that. But I agree with you, Brian, that there may be more than one of those two options. Dean, wanted to make a comment, no? I can try, but that's a good transition. Thanks, Diego. Kyung, you can go ahead. Try to speak, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. This is Sun Chung from China Telecom. Yes, and this is our first time to present our intent-driven management framework draft. And I want to say that the items and the terminologies will be updated according to the working group's decision. For example, the Alex draft, later we will update all the terms and the terminologies. And next, please. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Okay, this document is, we are at the beginning to describe this framework. So our draft, this zero version, have proposed our overall framework of the intent-driven framework. And we also defined some sample operations, including the intent layer, control layer, and network layer. And later, in the next version, we hope to add a use case example, for example, the SD-WAN, to show how to work with this framework. Next, please. Yes, this is the overall framework. And basically, we have three different layers: intent layer, control layer, and the network layer. So the intent layer is what we mostly focused on in this draft. And I will describe briefly about how to work in this framework. So when the request from the app layer, including, for example, the operator, the user, or application arrives the system, the intent management module, this module, will firstly collect the intent request and map out appropriate policy, including using the translation module, and also verify the correctness of the configuration. And then, sorry, previous slide. And then the decision module will deploy the configuration through the control layer automatically. So when the configuration is executed in the network, the verification module should verify the validity of the configuration implementation based on real-time status. So the effectiveness of the configuration can be constantly monitored to ensure the user's intent is effectively proceeded. But when an unexpected situation is encountered, the decision module can provide feedback dynamically to the user. So this is a complete life cycle. Yes, this is then the management module in this intent layer. The management module will mainly have three functionalities. First, it will receive the intent from the app layer, and it will verify and classify the intent. So if the intent is valid, the intent will be passed to the translation module. So here, the classification function will do something like the classification in previous draft will presented. Also, the management module will need to interact with the decision module and may receive some, for example, negative feedback from the decision module when the configuration execution does not work correctly. And the management module will also need to regulate the life cycle of the intent demands. So this is a closed loop. They will update the overall closed loop. Okay, next, please. Thank you. Next, please. Yes, this is the translation module. The translation module needs to analyze the semantics of the intent and formulate the corresponding configuration. And the outcome of the configuration plan to the verification module. So the translation module also need to translate and split the semantics contained in the intent demands. And also maybe the AI can also help to reference for the translation module. Okay, next, please. Okay, next, please. Thank you. Next, please. Okay, the verification module. Yes. The verification module mainly have two functionalities. The first is to verify whether the configuration can be executed in the actual network environment. It will collect some real-time network status and then provide relevant information to the decision module as feedback. And another thing is it will validate verification. When the configuration is actually executed, the network status may not change as expected. So it is necessary to verify whether the execution of the configuration works out as expected. The network is dynamically changing, so the network verification should be continuous in real time. Yes, this is the verification module. So next, please. Next. Okay, next, please. Yes, thank you. Next is the decision module. As just described, the decision module can precede the data received from the verification module and decide whether the configuration can be delivered to the control layer. Actually, the control layer is a traditional some controllers or network management system. It can deliver the configuration to the network element automatically. So the decision module will decide whether to configure it or not. And when the user's intent is not implemented or the network status is getting abnormal, so the decision module also need to notify the intent management module and the translation module to make response. So this is the decision module. Okay, the next, please. The last modular in intent layer is intent repository. It will mainly maintain the mapping between the intent and the configuration. So it will also interact with this translation module and mapping between different intent and configurations to help translation module work correctly. Okay, next please. The last tool is the control layer and the network layer. So the control layer mainly deliver the configuration request to the network layer, and the network layer, and it will also collect the network status and report it to the verification layer. So this is the overall framework and what we have seen currently. And next, please. Okay, next, please. So the last slide, yes, for the next step, because this is our first initial document, and in the next step, we hope to add some use cases and the intent examples to show how to work in this framework. And also we have got some offline comments, and we will update it in the next version. And we also hope you can join us and give us more feedback and more comments, and to improve the documents, especially our intent examples. We try to define the interfaces, the modules, the service model, the intent model, and the device model in this framework. So this is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. We have time for one very quick question. Otherwise, I would even prefer, if you have questions, to put it on the mailing list.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we still have one presentation from Pedro, and we need a bit of time to close the meeting.
Okay, I will just give a summary of the activities we are doing around in regard to AI for network management. So, in the main NMRG session at IETF 100 in Singapore, we began this activity, this initiative to involve more deeply AI into network management. We had a good milestone at IETF 104 in Prague, and we continued that with the virtual interview meetings when we achieved some advancement, the incorporation of advanced AI, external event considerations, and intelligent reasoning. And in parallel, we started the Network AI Challenge project. It is really different approach. We are trying to attract different communities from AI and network management in order to exploit as much as possible this possibility. So mainly in this challenge, we are looking for right now, we are looking for datasets and use cases. So if anybody is interested in participating in the building or even the execution, the assisting to this challenge, please contact us, mailing list, we are welcome. Please. So apart from that, we had a side meeting this week, and we did a quick overview of activities in ENI and how they are related to this AI in network management. So we have this evolution from the human-based to AI-based operation. So it is being real right now, also in ETSI. So several reference points were being specified. So the knowledge management, context management, cognition management, situation awareness, very important, and model-driven engineering and policy management, of course. So the requirements for this integration are mainly the normalization and denormalization of this information and intelligence. And several proof of concepts were presented. So we have, in general, 21 use cases in 5 categories, including management, network, operation, etc. And we have
as presented before by Will, we have different categorization of network intelligence, similar to the concept of automobile self-driving. And in general, we are also working toward the prediction of user of edge computing. That is very important for IoT, especially when the things want to offload some work from their own device to the edge or cloud. So it's very important to involve AI here. And in general, we are discussing on the interface and scheme of AI components to network components. So we are in discussion the model training and collaboration at vendor and operation side. I think that's it for now. Any question regarding this? No. So I will give some quick updates on the. Yes, is that this one? Yeah, I think it's next, please. Yeah. So in regarding the intelligent reasoning and in its involvement in the AI for network management, in this last update, we worked from the general application of AI to network management. So we are researching toward how can we step forward beyond current machine learning tools? How should AI be introduced, fully introduced into network management? How would AI be really exploited for network management? That's the key questions we are trying to address in this draft. And also we remarked the involvement of external events. So we have, for example, the definition of the control plane that is focused totally on the network itself, but we also have the management plane, but it can, apart from the network, it can also watch the environment of the network in order to see what events are important for the behavior of the network and react to them. So in order to do that, we are proposing to exploit intelligent reasoning that can reason the required management actions from this kind of events I am mentioning. Please, next. So in this update, we also introduced the main gaps and issues that we are finding here, that different providers and vendors must be able to coexist. So we need the methods to work together directly or by means of translator, but we use the same concept. So we need to agree on some common ontology, the concept that will be working together in this reasoning and AI application. We have also to step forward in the information retrieval that must be assessed on quality for the output from the AI reasoning. So it's very important to assess and to ensure that some company that is using some solution to be sure what's the quality of the solution it is using. So in that sense, also ontological concepts must be consistent to the types and qualities of information that I mentioned before, and the protocols used to communicate, they must be also compatible to each other. And also I have begun the work in this draft to relate to other activities. So for example, the ENI from ETSI. So next, please. And the intention here with this NMRG is to refine the design principle for this automated network management solution. So extending the management plane to events, as I have mentioned before, that are occurring beyond the boundaries of the managed network, but in the environment and that important for that network. So we need also to formalize formats for the management of that data, information, knowledge, and wisdom within and outside the database that is exchanging this information and cooperating with other activities like ETSI, ENI. That will also include telemetry information together with this AI solution, and in coordination with the formalization, for example, of the formalization of intent that is being discussed before. So in general, what we want to call to the NMRG community in order to support and enroll with us to the design and the validation of this information, including the protocols of interfaces to exchange of this intelligence information. So if anybody is interested, please Diego, I know you are interested, so please enroll.
No, not interested at all.
Ah, so you're saying.
No. Yeah, well, yes, I'm interested, but I think there are two things. One is from the previous slides that I wanted to make a comment. And apart from that is about the term intelligent reasoning, is what you...
Yes, intelligent reasoning.
I mean, if I have understood well what you were saying, this is something that in other cases has been referred as intelligibility or traceability of the AI. I mean, because it's about understanding why things are happening, right?
Yeah, for example.
But this is not an intelligent reasoning. You don't demand that the thing is intelligent or that reasons. It's that it tells you why things are happening. It's more about traceability or intelligibility more than reasoning.
The idea is to do both things at the same time. What we do is, what we do is, why?
Why? I mean, if I have something that is acting in an intelligent way, I don't want it to reason. I want it to inform me, which is something completely different.
Yeah, but of course you have. But for example, when you are assessing that thing that is telling you what to do, if you are assessing that thing, assessing the quality, if something is going not wrong or not optimal, you want to know what is happening. So
no,
that's
exactly. But this is not about the thing reasoning. Is my point. Is that, I mean, my point is that in general, and is in general in the field, people is which is the name, humanizing too much the things we are dealing with. Okay. Well,
it's just that we are at the
for
end of the
for the list. No, I know.
For our remote participants, the stream will close.
Okay, no, and simply one thing is when you were talking about the data sets, etc. We are in the position of contributing it, but I think we need something else, which is about we have to define the metadata for those data sets. This is something that we should define here.
Yeah, tagging
could be an interesting goal for the
yes. So please contribute that.
Thank you everyone for your participation, especially the last session of the first day. I've seen from the presentation and also from the very good comments that we have a lot of work ahead of us. I will really invite Benoit, Diane, and the others that may comment, Jeff, to bring them to the authors or to the mailing list. It will be very useful if you can write it down, because this is something we can much more easily exploit afterwards. And also, I invite you to continue being active in the research group. I think the point you were mentioning can really make us concentrate on key enablers, key functionality we need to deliver to really make this intent-based networking more a reality than it is today. So thank you very much. Tomorrow, for those that want to follow this discussion, there will be a very nice workshop in ETS, 10 minutes by walk from here. Otherwise, we will meet, I would say September with the virtual meeting and October for the interim. Otherwise, see you in Singapore. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Bye. Thanks. I like it.